The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger, Chapter 8. While sauntering through the streets of Constantinople one day, loitering in front of the bazaars, or listening to the tables of some storyteller on the street corner, I fell in with an Armenian merchant. He was a man of varied attainments, had read much, traveled much, seen much. We ate sweetmeats and drank coffee together for several days. He was so delighted with my keen intellect, sharp, nipping wit, and great powers of imagination that he expressed himself as being more than paid for his journey to Constantinople, although he had not yet opened his packs. When the time came for us to part, he proceeded to loosen the leather thongs which held down the lid of a strange looking chest, whose tops and sides were covered over with curious figures in inlays of several colors. From one corner of this receptacle he drew forth a volumum, or roll-book of antiquity. To one end of it was attached by a strip of parchment a waxen seal, stamped with what seemed to have been a monarch's signet ring. This ancient and venerable book exhaled a very musty smell. The Armenian handled it carefully, saying, "It is quite old, some 6,000 years." Seeing astonishment depicted on my countenance, he smiled and continued, "Yes, 6,000 years. It has only been unrolled far enough for me to decipher the nature of its contents. It treats of the human soul and pretends to have solved its mystery completely, a problem which has baffled the philosophers of all ages. It even goes so far as to claim that the essence which we call soul may be taken out of the body and put into a bottle, that one soul may be thrust into another man's body to keep his own company, and that in this manner the whole world may be reformed, made over, evil being entirely destroyed, and good only remaining. You smile, little baron, but it seems to me quite feasible. For instance, this rare old book quite rightly assumes that if we could thrust a good soul into a body already inhabited by a bad one, that man or woman would henceforth cease to do evil, or at least the good soul would continually betray its bad companion, and although the man might plan a murder, he would not fail to inform someone of his dread purpose, and thus defeat his own ends. Or, continued the merchant, take the case of a miser. By thrusting the soul of a spendthrift into his body, his inclination to hoard money and starve his family would be forever and always opposed by an ardent desire to waste his earnings, and the result would be these two vices would neutralize each other. And so, with a drunkard or a thief, by placing the soul of a water drinker in the one and of a moral man in the other, a perfect reformation could be brought about. This is a valuable book, little baron, but I give it to you, merely exacting a promise from you that, in case I am right in my understanding of it, you will impart the secret to the fathers of the church." I gave the merchant my promise, and not wishing to accept so valuable a present without making some return, therefore I drew from my finger a ring containing the petrified eye of a basilisk, which in the dark emitted light enough to read the hour on a watch dial. He was almost tiresome in an expression of thanks. We separated. I laid the ancient volume away in my chest and gave no thought of it until some time after my return home, when one fine day Bulger, attracted by its very musty odor, seized it by the vellum strip holding the seal and drew it forth from its hiding place, then looked up at my face as much to say, "What is it anyway, little master?" I determined to unroll the book at once. The merchant had warned me to be most careful in doing so, lest the whole thing fly into 1,000 pieces. I therefore proceeded to prepare a wooden table or panel, which I smeared with a strong glue, so that, as the parchment unwound, it should be caught by this sticky surface and held firmly fast. The plan succeeded admirably. After several hours' close application, I was overjoyed to see the volume entirely unrolled and held firmly and evenly to the surface of the panel. Fancy my delight, after the glue had dried sufficiently to make an examination of the writing, to find that this ancient volume was a palimpsest. I felt instinctively that this dissertation upon the nature of the soul was the sick man's dream of some poor dweller in the double darkness of ignorance and superstition. So I made haste to wash away his fervid outpourings by a plentiful use of something still hotter, namely hot water and soap. For my studies had told me that the ink used by the people of his time and generation contained no mordant, and was, in fact, only lampblack and grease. I now got at the real contents of this venerable book. The writing was dim and shadowy. I did not let that trouble me, for skilled as I am in the chemist's art, I lost no time in applying an acid which restored the writing to its old-time blackness. I had some difficulty in deciphering the language in which it was written, the ancient Phoenician, but with the aid of several scores of dictionaries, I finally rendered it into a modern tongue, passing it through the Aramaic, thence into Greek, and finally into my own tongue. When at last I had gotten over all difficulties and could read the descriptions with the ease necessary to bring out their full sense, I was nearly beside myself with joy. It was the story of a voyage made by a venturesome navigator 6,000 years ago, when the earth was still in its infancy, still hot in some places. In fact, only the highest mountains and tablelands had cooled off enough to be habitable. Pushing off from the shores of Arabia, this bold captain had pointed his ship toward the rising sun. And wonder of wonders, after many awful perils and terrible privations, he had entered waters which, to his almost unutterable amazement, grew warmer and warmer as he sailed over them. At first, his men refused to proceed any farther, but by dint of threats, persuasion, and goodly presents, the bold sailor went his way, wondering and rejoicing. After many days, he entered a body of water which, from his description, I at once recognized as the China Sea. But now all further advance was impossible. In vain his oarsmen lent their aid to drive the little vessel forward. Huge waves of heated water, always from the same direction, drove his craft backward. At last, the truth of the matter dawned upon him. He was at the outer edge of some vast boiling sea, which, rolling its hot waves ever outward, drove back his cockle shell of a bark. Making for a lofty promontory, he clambered to its highest point, wearing thick felt shoes and gloves to protect his feet and hands from the heated rocks. A fearful and yet sublimely beautiful sight met his eyes. For hundreds and hundreds of miles, the waters were in a state of most violent boiling, springing and leaping into the air as if a legion of giant demons were beneath, forcing their hot breath upward from vast cavernous lurking places. Upon reading of his boiling sea, I was seized with an uncontrollable desire to go in search of it. True, the waters might have cooled down in all these centuries, and yet I was confident I should find some trace of this once terrible cauldron of seething waters. The China Sea was only slightly known to navigators of my day and generation. It had often been darkly hinted at that this vast body of water was studded with wonderful isles and filled with rare monsters. I had no time to lose. Hastily penning a letter of adieu to my father and mother, I joined my ship, accompanied by my ever faithful Bulger, and turned her prow toward the rising sun. So well were the waters of the East known to me from my long and close study of the most reliable charts that I found I could almost steer my craft through them blindfolded. It was not many days ere I entered this beautiful expanse of water, which, in the youth of the world, was filled with such marvelous creatures swimming on and in it. Onward, ever onward, through its dark blue waves, now mounting their foam-crested heights, now rocking like a thing of life upon this billowy highway, my trusty little vessel plowed her way. 10 times a day, under plea of wishing to cool my brow in a basin of sea-water, I called out to some one of my men to let down a bucket, but only to find to my deep disappointment that its temperature was no higher than is usual in those latitudes. I began to grow low-spirited. My crew noticed my dejection, and at times my attentive ear caught murmurs of discontent. To restore my men to their usual good spirits, I offered a reward of 1,000 ducats to the one who should first discover the water was growing warmer. 1,000 ducats! It was a goodly sum, but I was growing desperate. The large reward, however, had one good effect. It put new life into my men. All day long, buckets rattled against the ship's side. 3 of the more venturesome men hit upon a plan to earn the reward and divide it among them. Lashing themselves together, they then lowered themselves down over the side of the vessel until their feet just touched the water. Here they determined to stay so that they might be the first to announce the increase of warmth in the water, and in this way make sure of the 1,000 ducats. Suddenly, a fearful outcry accompanied by the most piteous whining on the part of Bulger caused me to rush up on deck. A sea monster a third as long as our ship had risen directly under them. Motionless with fright, they fell an easy prey to this terrible foe. Opening his vast, cavernous jaws, he swallowed the whole 3 at a single gulp. My men were wild with grief. They heaped mad words of reproach upon me. I had great difficulty in restoring anything like order or discipline. My commands fell on deaf ears. At last, I succeeded in quieting the raging, weeping crowd. Knowing from my experience with such dread inhabitants of the deep that this monster had only whetted his appetite by these morsels of human flesh, I directed my men to make haste and construct a straw man, using clothes of the same color as those worn by the 3 unfortunates. Into the bosom of this effigy I stored away 1/4 quintal of epicurica, of prime quality, which by good luck I found in my stock of medicines. The dummy was now lowered to the water's edge at exactly the same spot where the monster had made his luncheon on my 3 excellent seamen. We had not long to wait. He rose to the bait in a few moments and opened his huge jaws, thrust out a tongue as large and as red as a roasted ox, and gulped down the savory morsel I had provided for him, with a rumbling gurgle which made my blood run cold. Recovering myself, I sprang up into the shrouds and kept my eyes fixed upon this rare monster, who floated away lazily a ship's length and then came to a dead halt. Ever and anon a quiver shot through the entire length of his body. Evidently, he was having no little difficulty in swallowing this last morsel. And we'll pause here and continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.